Hey guys, I'm Sun. I'm a privacy and a security researcher, and you're watching the Privacy Guides. In last episode, I went about this. Last episode, should I have said? I went about explaining why two-factor authentication is such a crucial part of your security stack, and I explained how 2FA uses concepts from InfoSec and OPSEC to make your stuff more secure. Now, if I go through, key insights from last video, well, say you have an account with LinkedIn and say LinkedIn gets hacked and somehow someone can have access to your LinkedIn password. Well, that person could, log in from wherever they are in the world and gain access to your account. Another example is if your computer is compromised and someone has some kind of a backdoor on it and they're capturing all of your keystrokes, well, they could, get access to your your password, I should have said, and then gain access to your accounts. Well, a way to mitigate that is using two-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication is a subset of something called multiple factor authentication. So examples of great two-factor authentication is using something you have and something you are. Or using two separate things you have on two separate devices, for instance. So you have your password and you have access to a two-factor authentication app on your iPhone, for instance. Or for another example is you have a password, which is in your mind, and you have your fingerprint, which is, biometrics. Now, using biometrics instead of your password, well, that's not two-factor, that's a single factor. Okay. So the reason why 2FA is such an essential part of your security stack is if someone somehow has access to your password, and by the way, a way of knowing if one of your email addresses has linked passwords in one of the data leaks is to go on a website called Have I Been Pawned, and on that website you can enter your email address and it will tell you if that email address is found in data breaches. There's another amazing feature of Have I Been Pawned that requires a little more technical know-how, but it will even allow you to enter your password in a secure hashed way and know if that password is in one of these databases. And the reason why that is so important is if it is, chances are that, say the SHA-256 hash or any other forms of hash is linked to that password, and that means that I can do a reverse dictionary attack against your password using these databases, and that's what hackers would try first. So I'll create an episode sometime in the future about looking at if your password has been compromised, and if you're into that, smash the subscribe button and you'll be able to have a look at that later. Now back to this episode. Two-factor authentication is amazing at mitigating attack vectors such as, your password has been hacked or leaked. The reason why is if someone tries to log into your account from somewhere around the world and 2FA is enabled, well, that person will have to have access to the 2FA token. So I mentioned in part one what the token is. The token is derived from the hash, which is also combined with the current time. So hash plus current time equals token. If you haven't seen that episode, I'll link it in the description. Wow, that's a lot of information. Okay, so if you use 2FA in a good way, that it will really help protect this scenario. The problem is a lot of accounts or a lot of providers, well, they don't want to lock you out of your account because obviously you would be kind of pissed. So they always have, different recovery methods, and a lot of them will allow you to enable 2FA. But, if you're using 2FA via email, well, that's not great because if someone is able to compromise your email account, well, they then have access to all of the 2FA tokens. If you're using SMS as a 2FA factor, well, it's proven that a lot of people are doing what we call SIM port hacks. They're able to impersonate you and go to your carrier and tell them, hey, I've lost my phone, I have a new SIM card, can you please link my account to that SIM card? And what happens is really scary. you go to your phone and you try to make calls, and it's like if you're disconnected from the network. And from that point on, the person with the SIM card that works in another phone can go ahead and try to do a password reset, try to get into your accounts. And if they have your password for different reasons, well, they can then get via SMS the 2FA token and they can enter your accounts. That's why I highly recommend using a two-factor authentication app instead of email or SMS 2FA. The problem is, as I just mentioned earlier, a lot of providers will not let you choose. They're going to let you enable 2FA, and they'll have an option like I've lost my phone, and then they're going to revert back to email 2FA, which kind of I'm trying to find the words in English, but it renders the whole concept of 2FA kind of useless because it puts the attack vector back to email, which is not great because if your email is compromised, and that's the number one thing that people will try to hack first, you're screwed. So we'll take for granted that your provider, your supplier, I always confuse all those words, but you get me to Facebook or Google or whoever, say they've done a good job at implementing 2FA, and that's really, really not the case for most providers, but say they had, well, what can you do to make things more secure? Well, I recommend using a two-factor authentication app that is password protected. And the reason why is you're probably using biometrics to get into your phone. So if you use Google Authenticator, well, someone who has physical access to you, and that's in the realm of OPSEC, they can just whack you on the head, take your finger or your face, unlock your device, and then they have access to your second factor. So if they're able to have access to your password somehow, while using a physical attack, they could have access to your second factor and they're in. So a solution to that is by using a separate password for your 2FA app. And as I said in earlier episodes, you should always use a password for your hardware. That isn't that complicated, but still, that I've explained how to choose a good one in the video on setting up macOS. And you want to use a really amazing passphrase for your password manager. And that I explained in my earlier episodes on setting up a password manager. It was about MacPass. And you want to have a third password for your two-factor authentication app. And as I mentioned, a third meaning not the same as the two others. And as far as complexity goes, I recommend using a password that's like 12 to 14 characters long for your hardware and your two-factor authentication app. You don't want to go overkill on this. You want to keep overkill for your password manager, crypto wallets, or things like that, because the 2FA and passwords to your hardware, those are things that you're going to be entering on a really regular basis. Your password manager, once it's unlocked, you can just copy things, and when you lock your computer up, well, it locks that password manager again, so you're safe. Whew, that's a lot of information. Jesus. Okay. So what we're looking for as a great 2FA app on your iPhone is an app that will encrypt all of your hashes. I explained what hashes were in part 1. You want to make sure that you never enable biometrics and that when you access the app, it will ask you for that password each time. You also want to make sure that you have an amazing way of creating backups that are not on the cloud, backups that do not leave your local network. I explained why that's amazing in my video, in my episode, goddammit, on 1Password. Okay, so let's go about setting this up. So I need to start, hopefully it's not my first time trying that episode. I mean, I have to record on 3 devices at the same time. I always get confused. So we're gonna start the setup here. I need to start recording on my iPhone. Okay. You want to start setting up the app. The app that I really recommend is called OTP Auth. It's an app that's designed by an independent developer. He's called Roland Moors. I'm probably messing up his name. I'm so sorry. Roland has done an incredible job at creating a two-factor authentication app that is amazing. It scores 100% on most of my things. The only thing that would make it perfect is if it was open source. And as a matter of fact, if ever the developer stops developing this app and it gets off the App Store, well, there is an open source project on GitHub that will allow you to unlock your accounts. And I contributed to that project. the whole thing uses pretty decent cryptography. So thanks, Roland. Great work. I highly recommend using this app instead of Google Authenticator or Authy or all of the others, because it's a pretty sovereign approach and it's great. So let's go ahead, start setup. So now it's asking us for a secret password. As I mentioned, I would use a password of the same complexity as the one you're using for your hardware. I discussed this in my episode on setting up Mac OS for privacy. So I'm using something that's like about 12 characters long. So let's go ahead and enter this here. Okay, and as always, I'm having a hard time typing the same password twice. Whew, good. Continue. Once we're here, we absolutely want to require that password on start. And as you can see, and as I mentioned earlier in the series, you never want to enable Face ID or Touch ID for your password manager or wallet or 2FA app. And as you can see, Roland has not enabled that by default. And that's a great example of how developers should think, oh, I like that app. Let's go ahead. So we're now done. And as you can see here, it's asking us to enter that password again. That's 2 password verifications with a slight amount of time between them. I've had friends that, went about creating passwords and they actually made a typo twice and then came back to it weeks later and couldn't get in and freaked out. That is actually great UX. So we're going to enter it again. And once we're here, we're in. So it starts us in a default folder, and that's totally fine. So let's switch to the other screen. Oh, I need to enter here. Okay. So in my previous episode on 1Password, I created a 1Password account, and I deliberately didn't install. Geez, I'm losing it here. I didn't configure 2-factor authentication, and I absolutely should have, but I didn't because I knew this episode was coming. So let's do it. Let's make things right. If I click here on John Doe and I go in my profile, I'm going to have to blur some things here because obviously I'm disclosing a bit too much. If I go in more actions, manage 2-factor authentication, that's when we get to enable 2FA. And you absolutely should do what I'm doing here on all of your accounts. Once your setup is done with the app, you want to make sure you enable this for, Google, Facebook, Reddit, 1Password. Most providers will let you enable 2FA. And if they don't, you should really question how serious they are about privacy and security. Okay, so setup app. So you now see a QR code and you see here a little hash. So I explained what hashes were in part 1. The QR code is just a kind of like really great way of allowing you to scan that using your iPhone so you don't have to type in, the provider, which is 1Password in this case, and that little hash. So if you click on plus and you click on scan barcode with camera, it will ask you to allow camera access, yes. And now if you scan this, you'll see that you now have access to one of the tokens here. And as you can see, there's this little wheel here that's cycling 3 times. As I mentioned in part 1, these tokens are only valid for roughly between 30 and 60 seconds, depending on the implementation. So if we click next, it will ask us to enter that. So 849, confirm, and we're done. So by entering that there, we proved cryptographically that we actually have an app and it's well configured. And as you can see here, we can see it's 1Password, we can see the website, and we can see tokens. All of this was kind of done by magic using the QR code. QR codes is actually an amazing way of sending data between 2 devices without having to plug them into each other or connecting them to each other using a network. And that will be the subject of a future episode. It's actually an amazing way of moving data between devices, even if a device is cold, meaning it's never connected to the internet. So if you're into that stuff, smash the subscribe button and we'll get there a little later in the series. Okay, so now that this is done, there's only one thing that actually remains. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of providers do not implement 2FA in a strict way. They'll kind of do it as a convenience thing. They'll use an app such as OTP Auth to make it look like you're, secured by 2FA, using a second factor device, which is really an effective way from an OPSEC perspective of mitigating a lot of risks. But if you lose that phone, they'll allow you to use email or SMS 2FA as a backup. Oh, Jesus Christ, they shouldn't do that. That's nasty, okay? They should allow you to implement actual great security, and that's not the case. But we'll suppose that 1Password, and I haven't tried it, okay, but we'll suppose that 1Password, if you lose your phone and you lose that hash that was in the QR code or written right there, if you lose this, you cannot recover your account. We'll suppose that they're doing things right. And maybe they are. I haven't tried it. Well, you want to make sure you have amazing backups of the OTP Auth data set, because if you lose that and you lose your backups, well, you can no longer access this account, so you've essentially lost the account. The one feature that I haven't discussed yet or shown to you guys yet in OTP Auth is it allows you to do backups in a lot of amazing ways that do not require a cloud, okay? So if you click on the little cog here and you scroll down, you'll see that you can synchronize this using iCloud. And OTP Auth they have an app that you can install on your Mac. As I mentioned in part 1, you absolutely do not want to run your password manager and your two-factor authentication app on the same device, because if that device has been compromised, well, someone could have all the keystrokes, and that means that they have your password to your password manager and to your two-factor authentication app, and that means that you've been compromised. You want to install it on a separate device, and that's what we've done here on the iPhone. But you still want to have good backups, and it's okay for the backups to be on your Mac, for instance. So a great way of doing that is each time you enter a new supplier into this app, you go ahead and you say create backup, and it will now ask you for a secret password. Now, this is not necessarily the same that you're using for when you enter this app. It could be something completely different, but as we're starting to pile up passwords that you need to remember, we'll just use the same. So let's do this. Okay. So it will ask us to confirm that again. And once this is done, okay, here are the options. So I really recommend you guys install Signal as a messenger app, and that will be the subject of another episode. So again, if you're into this, smash the subscribe button. But it allows you to send it via email, via Signal, via messages, or save it to a file on the phone, or use iTunes file sharing. Man, that developer did a great job. Thank you so much, Roland. I mean, this is such a great way of doing backups. It gives you a lot of freedom. So you can go ahead and save it to the files, send it to yourself via Signal. I mean, my setup here for the vlog is not fully functional yet. I don't have Signal on this specific operating system. So I cannot show you this all the way to the end, but what I can show you is if you go ahead and you save it to your files, okay? Now you can save it on your iPhone, and then you'll see that there's an OTP Auth folder. So you can click on here and then do add. What that means is it essentially saved the backup file onto your phone. And once that's done, you can access that file using iTunes. Now, the way my iPhone is set up, it's supervised, meaning only a computer that's authorized to the phone, only that computer can exchange files with it. It makes the setup much safer if someone finds my phone and tries to, access data from it. That will be the subject of, again, another episode. As you can see, I have quite a lineup of content for you guys So I hope you're into this stuff. So unfortunately, I cannot finish this video. I would have liked to show you in iTunes how I can get the file. And as I'm saying this, obviously I need to show this to you guys, or else you won't have backup, so you cannot actually implement this in production. I'll show you how to get the file onto my other computer, because we want to see this to the end. So I'll cut this here and I'll see you guys in a second. I'll have to reboot to my production Mac OS. All right, see you in a second. All right, guys, getting your backups off your iPhone is pretty straightforward. You want to start by plugging it into your computer and unlocking it. Now that you're in iTunes, you want to click on your iPhone, then on file sharing, then on OTP Auth, and within that you have your backup, which you want to save to your file system. On my computer, I have a folder called OTP Auth that's also backed up to Time Machine, making sure I have copies of that all over the place. So you hit save and you're good. Now make sure that you have a copy of that backup outside of your home, and when you're traveling, make sure there's a copy that's not where you are, because say you're backpacking and someone steals your computer and your iPhone, well, you're doomed. Make sure you leave a copy at home, or if you're always at home, make sure you leave a copy at your parents' place or somewhere similar to that. So as you can see, getting the backup from iTunes is actually quite easy. It requires a little bit of work. Oh, my computer is now exporting the thing. Maybe you can hear the fans, maybe you can't, hopefully you can't. It requires a little bit of work, but keep in mind that you're not going to be signing up to 1 million accounts every day. So it's something you're going to do on a once in a while basis. So OTP Auth is an amazing two-factor authentication app. It's great because it uses a password to encrypt your hashes on the device. It's great because you don't have to use biometrics to get in. It's great because it's got a pretty neat UX. It's great because it has an amazing way of doing backups that are not that do not require the cloud. So if you want to have backups, for instance, with Authy, you need to use the cloud. If you want to use backups with Google Authenticator, you have to use your iPhone backups. This gives you way more control on how you can back up your data. And as I said, if a supplier implements 2FA properly, well, shit, if you don't have backups, you're screwed. So this has your back. And as I mentioned, there's an open source script that you can run to decrypt the passwords of your backups. So even if this app gets off the App Store, you're still covered. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was part 2 on 2FA. And if you're into this kind of content, smash the subscribe button. As I said, there's a huge lineup of content coming. I'm really happy to share this with you, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.